transformation lies in its resilience. It lies in the resilience of its people and the political will to embrace citizen-driven reform, youth inclusion, and visionary leadership. And if we go and give specific details as to who said what, recall that the President of the Republic of Gambia, His Excellency Adama Barrow, called for deeper investment in inclusive and participatory governance systems to address our complex challenges in the region. He also reaffirmed his government's commitment to people-centered reform and urged all of us here to inspire innovative partnerships that can shape resilient institutions and shared prosperity. President Jonathan also challenged us to move beyond the rhetorics to practical wealth-creating solutions for the Sahel. Madam Ahunna declared that the crisis in the Sahel is not just about fragility. That's the conversation when you talk about the Sahel. Everybody says, oh, it is fractured, it is fragile, it is volatile. But she said that it is a failure to invest in governance as a force for justice and prosperity. Again, the word justice. She also called for a paradigm shift from managing instability to building legitimacy, and from perceiving citizens as risk to empowering them as solution bearers. I could go on and on and on, but like I said, the key messaging is that we would have to develop very innovative and practical solutions to address the challenges that we face in the Sahel. It's a powerful call for all of us seated here today to just go. It's not just symbolic, but to serve that this forum is not just symbolic, but that it serves as a launch pad for a new governance compact that will define the future of the Sahel. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I would like to dive straight to the first panel of today. We have heard that one of the key takeaways had to do with visionary leadership. Today we will be talking about, the first panel for today will be the art of leadership. And this will be a conversation with the former President of the Republic of Nigeria, His Excellency Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, and we moderated by the Assistant Secretary General of UNDP, Assistant Administrator and Director of the Regional Bureau for Africa, Madam Ahunna Eziakonwa. Please, ladies and gentlemen, please give Madam a warm welcome to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all sufficiently stimulated after yesterday. It was really a powerful co-creation of intellectual insights, but also a hearty recognition of needs in this region, needs in the world, and the fact that together there's actually the possibility of making change happen. So it was an optimistic thing, even as we registered the challenges. Today, we're going to have a conversation on, I think, one of the core elements of governance, which is leadership. Mr. President, I think we're very honored to have you in our midst. You know, one thing that happens when you become a president, there's a huge distance between you and people. because you are very much protected. People don't have any kind of insight. They don't have the inside look in your room. When you become former president, it really becomes possible to get some insights on what it means to be on that seat. And I want to thank you for making yourself available. It's important that we understand, because often we have a lot of guesswork about what leaders are going through, about what drives them, about, why, how, what. So today we have an exciting hour together with this Mr. President to get into some of these nitty-gritties of leadership. Hear me on this one. Is it okay? So I'm going to kick it off with a question that's been on my mind about you, Mr. President. That question is about what's in a name. Good luck. I'm very big on names, and I don't know why your parents named you Good Luck, but it seems to me your name has kind of been fundamental in your trajectory. If I'm not mistaken, you were deputy governor of your state. Something happened to the governor, you became governor. And then you were vice president. Something happened to the president and you became president. Is that good luck? Or is there something else going on there, Mr. President?
Thank you so much for starting with this angle. Because my trajectory into politics, by the time I good luck, because you want them to have the kind of luck I have. Well, if you talk about the relevance of a name, as a Christian, I know that names are significant. Because if you go through the scriptures, if a child is born and God wants that child to do a particular thing, sometimes direct the parents to rename the child, call him this, call him that. That means that there's something. Even philosophically, even traditionally, we give children good names in terms of wishing them well, hoping that they will live by the name. But in reality, it doesn't go that way. From my village alone, small community alone, we had up to, as we were growing up, we have about 3 good lucks or lucky and things like that. But it's only my own that manifests. So bearing the name Good Luck alone, not necessarily, you must also have to do certain things to make sure that what your parents expect from you materializes. Thank you.
So the luck did not start to manifest immediately, because you've often said that you grew up without shoes, without bags, to go to school. You trekked, as we say in Nigeria, many miles to get to school. You studied under lanterns, there was no electricity, and this child without shoes rises to become the leader of the largest country on the African continent. What do you think those days, those early days of being without, how do you think that shaped then the quality of leadership that you delivered? Did it make you more compassionate? Was there a link? Just sort of walk us through a little bit how living under those conditions, that being your formative years, your beginnings, quite poor, and then rising to that level when you then land at your desk on day one as president of Nigeria, did your upbringing have shaped how you delivered as president?
Definitely it does. Because when you pass through my kind of life history, trajectory, from nothing to the top, that's supposed to humble you. So if you see the next child or the next person, even if that person is still low, you should know that if you are able to get up from that level to the peak, that child too can get to the peak. That really helps you in terms of your relationship with people. A number of people say, President, you're a very humble person. I must be humbled because I was not born with silver spoon in the mouth. I grew from the gutter, kind of, in a rural setting. So it was by divine providence that Nigerians voted for me, I become their president. So that humbles you. And that makes you to have that patience to listen to people, try to recognize issues properly before taking decisions. And you compare that to probably people that were born with silver spoons in their mouth. Some people think that we are specially created to come and oversee human beings. If I see how some president and even some national government heads, like in Nigeria, we talk about our states. In some other countries, you have the provinces, the regions. Even if you have an idea about what happens in the executive council meeting, it's a monologue. The person at the head alone talks, and after announcing, you leave. The commissioners or ministers virtually have no input. One of my governors, who was my minister at that capital, is here. As a president then, any issue that comes up on the floor of the Executive Council, I expected everybody to interrogate that issue very clearly. There are issues that I even have taken a decision, because sometimes a memo is getting late for certain things. The president can give anticipatory approval so that the works can go on, but it will still come to ESCO. Ordinarily, if executive president approves a memo, there's nothing you can do again. But then it must still come to council for ratification. And sometimes when you see some of my ministers tearing that memo, you will be surprised. I say, it's allowed, so that the minister that brought that memo should know that there were some issues that were not properly done, so that subsequently you will do it properly. It gives that person the opportunity to be who you are, to relate with people. So you don't just run a system, whether as a president or a governor or a prime minister or whatever. You see others as mere mortals, and you are a superior being that have to lord over them. So to me, my upbringing from the scratch helps to guide my pathway and help the way I relate with people.
So please, let's avoid presidents with silver spoon and go for those who have the deep experience of the majority of the people. But I'm sure that that's not the only thing that makes you deliver from a compassionate and accountable perspective. There's also character and all of that. And we'll get a little bit to that in a second. So, Mr. President, we in UNDP, we support elections, right? We are there all the time to support elections to be fair, free, and stable. And I have to say, as a UN official who's been in these countries when elections are being held, the biggest issue is not elections. It's accepting the result of the elections. And there we sort of brace ourselves for conflict, for violence, because culturally, in a lot of these elections, it seems acceptance is a real issue. And then, as a result, we have a lot of instability. Electoral violence on the continent is quite pervasive. You stood out when you conceded an election even before the results. And I think the world was watching because we know that Nigeria is very vulnerable to violence because it's a multi-ethnic society as well, and sometimes elections can go that route. So any little spark could sort of lead to huge violence. But you stood out and you conceded. Can you sort of narrate to us a little bit what that moment was like? What pushed you to get to that point where you say, I'm going to concede, despite the fact that I'm sure there were constituencies, because as a leader, you're not standing alone. You know, you are representing a party and a lot of interest. So I can imagine that there was a lot of pressure. But regardless, you stepped out and you conceded. And disappointing, I'm sure, a lot of people who wanted to see it otherwise. So what led you to that moment? What was in your mind? What were you thinking?
Thank you so much. Well, like I mentioned, to take certain decisions as a leader, as a president.
Yeah.
It's difficult because we are taking a decision that will affect so many people. But still, you must be in a position to take hard decisions.
Is this mic working?
Thank you. Just like you mentioned, as a leader, especially as the president of a country, taking decisions are very complicated issues because the decisions you take don't affect only you, but affect so many people. And a complex country like Nigeria, where ethnicity is always there, religion is always there. When you are taking certain decisions, especially politically related, it affects the people that work with you, it affects your ethnic group, it affects people who have the same faith with you. So there are so many things. But even at that, a president must take very hard decisions as long as you are convinced that that is in the best interest of the people, even if that decision will cost you personally. When you mentioned the issue of the elections, I think I gave you a copy of my book in Ghana. If you read a section of it, I mentioned what was going through my mind those last hours leading to the elections, and for me to concede defeat and call late General Buhari to congratulate him even before the election was formally announced. One thing can guide anybody to take such decisions. First and foremost is the motive that takes you to politics. Why did you get into politics? On the average, I can say probably more people get into politics because they want to make money. If that is your driving motive for going to the politics, then you wouldn't want to leave the office. You prefer to die there in the office. But if that is not the reason, you want to serve the people, and you notice that things have changed, and if you don't take certain decisions, it will affect the very people that you want to serve. In Nigeria then, I knew as a president that the country was very tense, and it could have led to killings and destruction of private properties. And when I look at the whole scenario, I felt that no, it's not about being the president of Nigeria. In line with my slogan during the campaigns, that my political ambition to be the president of Nigeria is not worth the blood of any Nigerian. So I had to take that decision to make sure that we protect people's assets. Because we worked hard for that 5 years I was the president of Nigeria. We encouraged local and foreign investments in the country. And I cannot sit down and watch people vandalizing and destroying people's investment in the name of political conflicts, like we see what is happening in South Sudan, what is happening in Sudan and other countries. These countries have been degraded because of leadership struggle. And I feel Nigeria should not pass through that trajectory as a nation. So it was easy for me to take that decision. It was not too pleasing to everybody. And of course, people who worked with me suffered because of that decision. But still, I'm happy today that I took that decision to save the life of people, to protect the investment of Nigerians. And I think Nigerians even appreciate me more now than when I was in office. So what is the issue of being a president for? Anybody can be a president. But when you become a president, what did you leave behind? What will people remember you for? That is fundamental. Thank you.
But the key word you used is motive, the why. What's your why? Why are you getting there? But, no, Mike. Hello, can you hear me? Okay, so, you talked about motive and you talked about, people sometimes going to for making money, but actually a lot of those who end up in these positions have already, maybe yours is an exception, but most of our leaders come from money. And so you wonder, what is the other motive? What else? I mean, we also know about power, right? And I've often wondered how leaders in Africa in particular, where there is a bit of a worship culture, you find that once you get to a certain position, people around you literally worship you. And they create this sense of a God. Leaders are actually made by the people. And unfortunately, in the context of Africa, we revere this position, perhaps to the extreme. How does that make you feel when you stand up? A million people around you stand up. They're literally like, "Hey, Oga, Igwe." You're sort of revered, and does that? How do you resist playing God? How does that make you feel? How do you retain some form of humility despite this worship?
Thank you so much. In your introductory remarks, mentioned that a number of people who became leaders in our countries, presidents, prime ministers, came from money, which is true. But don't forget that elementary economics said that human wants are insatiable. No, the human wants, nobody earns money and thinks it's enough. So they will expect to get more. You think that they are so rich, they are stupendously rich, but to them, they want more. And to me, one key thing about what I notice is there's a slight difference between corruption to make money and greed. The greatest problem we have in most of our countries is greed by leaders. Not necessarily heads of state alone, even those who have the opportunity to head departments of government. It's greed that can make somebody steal money that you will not spend. That is beyond corruption. If you read this book written by one British journalist, Richard Dowden, published in 2008, read the section on Nigeria. It talks about corruption in Nigeria, and I totally agree with him. So, the people who have the privilege of being heads of state, if they are not greedy, they use the resources better. They make sure the resources go around through projects and other in the nations better. But when they are greedy, one person alone will want to take 50% of the resources or the income of the country and go and hide it in a bank abroad that he will not even spend the money. See, so these are the fundamental issues. So, yes, you talked about heads of state or leaders now becoming like little gods, deities. Some people like to be worshipped, and maybe that is one of the things that makes me completely different. I hate it. I don't like it at all. In fact, those who have worked with me when I was in office, from the state to the center, and even those who are still working with me, they will know my ways of life. My executive director is here, and my medium aide is also here. I hate a situation where this hero worship, where people begin to worship leaders as if you are not a human being again. And that one gets into the mind of leaders, and they begin to play the role of God on earth. Maybe the kings can play that role because they are, but to me, I'm a mere mortal. I hate it. And that's fundamental.
So how would you, I mean, as someone who's been on the other side, and obviously the relationship between the people and the leaders, and sometimes the leaders reinforce, the people reinforcing this sense of, I am God. If you are speaking to citizens, electorate, from that position of power, what do you think people need to do not to play a part in creating leaders who become monsters and who actually mismanage leadership? What is the responsibility of the citizens?
For African society, it's actually difficult for the people because it is when we have robust economies in nations where people don't need to be close to government to be able to feed themselves, take care of their families, then citizens can be independent-minded. But where you have societies where everybody will go to people in government to get favor before you can take care of yourself and your family, of course, you fall into the hero worship because some of them want that. And if you don't, of course, you will not be accommodated. So you have to do. And sometimes it becomes a culture of the people. There is somebody told me a funny thing, though it has nothing to do with political leadership. A man in Nigeria, we know we love titles. Chief this, Alaji that. And somebody wanted to see a man that was a chief for something. I got to the house, knocked, the wife came and opened the house, and the man said, I want to see, let's say Jonathan, I want to see Mr. Jonathan. Then the wife just shouted at the man, there's no Mr. Jonathan in this house, and banged the door. Because the man did not say Chief Jonathan. So this is in us, not just political leaders, even the ordinary people. And that is why probably some of our cultures, we have these praise singers that sing praises to dignitaries and you give them money. It's very common, especially in the southwestern part of Nigeria. So it becomes a part of the system. For us to get out of that, we must develop our economies that people will not need to know the face of a commissioner, to know who is the minister, not to talk about a president. So get whatever he wants to get from society.
Coming to that point, because you know, one of the puzzles that a lot of people feel about Africa is a very rich continent in natural resources, being home to some of the poorest people in the world. And this disconnect between Africa's potential and the opportunity or lack of opportunity for its people, a lot of people tend to ascribe that to corruption. Something you've described as pure stealing. So don't, kind of use corruption as some kind of abstract term. We're talking about people stealing what doesn't belong to them. But maybe let's come to a moment that is a little bit personal here in terms of your confrontation of this issue. Because we also know not all leaders in Africa are accumulating wealth or are there to accumulate wealth. Some have been able to use their leadership influence to fight corruption more successfully than others. In a country like Nigeria, obviously with the complex layers, it's a federal system. You have state-level corruption as well, and you have local-level corruption. In your moments of frustration, because, at the time you took office, Nigeria was declared the largest economy in Africa. That means something. But at the same time, multidimensional poverty in Nigeria was greater than anywhere else in Africa. And then, so you're looking at this situation, how did you rein in on those habits and tendencies that robbed millions of Nigerians, hard-working people, by the way, of the opportunity to prosper? What was your biggest challenge in trying to address the issue in a country like Nigeria? How did you, because, the top might not, the person leading might not be correct, but you have a whole machinery where the stealing is cascading, but is there a role for the man at the top or the woman at the top to put a brake on this? How did you do it, or try to do it? What did you confront? Is it possible? Is the question. And you're speaking to leaders now. Let's say you're, presidents who have just come into office are listening to you. They are facing similar situations. What steps do you think, in hindsight, as you reflect on maybe some of the things you succeeded on and some of the things that you failed on? In hindsight, what is the secret of addressing this issue on the African continent?
Thank you. Of course, you raised the issue of maybe for our GDP then and the level of poverty. Of course, the issue of corruption. Even when I was in office, there were some scandals about corruption. Maybe trying to be diplomatic. You don't want to ask me directly. I would have loved that you asked me directly, so I can give you some perspective. But a number of issues. First and foremost, yes, Africa is a rich continent. We'll say potentially rich. But your wealth in resources will not create wealth for the people until you are able to exploit these resources yourself and add value to the resources. Be it forest produce, be it liquid mineral like crude oil, be it solid minerals. The problem in Africa is that where and why in Africa that we're adding value to what we produce. It is now some countries are trying. If you go to a place like Ethiopia, go to a place like Kenya, I think their coffee, they're no longer just exploiting the ports, they're adding value. Maybe Côte d'Ivoire, they're producing chocolate and things like that. Not to talk about the mineral that's more technical. So for us to really say Africa is a rich country, we must be in position to exploit our resources. We must be able to add value to our resources and export the finished produce. Otherwise, you export raw materials and create jobs for others, and then we go to those countries to struggle for jobs, and they treat us anyhow they like. So I don't see Africa as a rich country because we've not been able to convert what we have in our natural environment to means of exchange. And yes,
President, in the case of Nigeria, and what were the issues?
I'm coming. For example, yesterday when I spoke, mentioned briefly that first and foremost, there are two levels of poverty. The multidimensional poverty, that will say that people are extremely poor. These are most cases peasants, people who have no skills, probably not even educated. And for you to make sure that people get out of that level, you must look at what dominates the local economies in the various areas and encourage it. In Nigeria, we're an agrarian society, and that is why we did very well in agriculture. If you interview Akin, the present ADB president, he will tell you what we did. It was because of what we did in agriculture that made him to even be appointed or elected as the president of the African Development Bank. So that is to make sure that that was form of poverty at that level. Then, of course, the other levels, look, we cannot continue. Nigeria, we are known for crude oil. We export crude oil, then we import petroleum products. This is not ironical. We export the crude oil. Then we go to other countries to import aviation fuel, we import EMS for our cars, we import kerosene. So we started encouraging that, look, we must have refineries. The government refineries were all broken down. We tried to reactivate them, but it was always a problem. So the only thing is to encourage the private sector. And we started the journey. Now, Dangote, in fact, Nigeria is no longer importing petroleum products. We started that journey. And we didn't do much in the solid mineral sector. Maybe because there were too many, we changed the ministers too frequently. But that was my directive to any of the ministers that I appointed. We cannot continue to export raw materials. Go to Nigeria, go to states like Zamfara State, where the poverty level is quite high. Out of school, population is quite high. When I was in office, it was about 70% of children were not going to school. So you can see the level at which people operate. But you have gold. And people from modern nationalities, from what you see, are just using the locals to steal and send it out of the country. So until we are able to exploit our own resources, add value to our own resources, and export finished produce, we cannot just claim we are rich, we are rich, we are rich. We are poor. That is clear. Then when we talked, maybe you talked about the issues of corruption in Africa. Yes, though sometimes some of these corruption issues that we read in the papers are somehow blown out of proportion. Let me give you an example. To me, when I came into office, 2011, I signed the Freedom of Information Bill into law, passed a law to give journalists and people in civil society free access to get any information you want to get from any department of government. Somebody who wants to be stealing money will not do that. So that if you hear anything, whistleblower anything, you are free to go. And if the government official fail to give you that information, it's a criminal offense. We did that. When we were to celebrate, 2010, when we were to celebrate 50 years of our independence, 50 years of Nigeria independence, there's something I did with my cabinet. Probably if my governor here, maybe if he attended the council meeting that day, he will remember. I bought this book written by Richard Dawson called Africa, Altered States, Ordinary Miracles, and talks about all kinds of things across. It's a British journalist that has been covering Africa since 1975. When he talks about Nigeria, life in Lagos, corruption in Nigeria, and so on. I bought that book and distributed to council members, and I also bought this Singaporean man's book, From Third to First, Aliko and you also. Yes, I said they should read. Then I asked them to read the section on Nigeria, especially from Richard's book. So I told them that this program, we have a conference like this, but we are going to invite that man to be the keynote speaker. And my own minister said, President, no. That this man that finished us, no, you cannot bring him. I said, the man did not finish us. We must invite him, let him come and speak. Let us know the perception of people about us. Some may be ordinary perception, some may be real. Let us not deceive us. But, well, as executive president, I forced on my ministers. We invited that man.
You made an executive order.
No. Then I also invited one lady, a white lady from South African journalist that wrote a book based in colonial politics. This is our turn to chop. You know this lady, Michelle, yes, wrong, yes, Michelle Wrong. As one of the panelists, Kenya and Nigeria have some similar attributes in terms of certain things. And my ministers were looking at me. I said, they must come. We must interact with them. And we had the conference. Dodin said that when he got the invitation, he said, he was surprised that probably the president is inviting him so that the president will hurt him because of what he wrote about Nigeria. But that is my mind. So it was totally committed to, you can't eradicate corruption completely, but should be able to reduce it to the level that will not affect society again. At least one country that has done well recently is Rwanda. Kagame is doing quite well in terms of that. I did not succeed to that level. I know during my government there was this scandal, which was more political than, and those who read it. For example, the CBN governor, the head of my treasury, raised an alarm that we lost $49.8 billion between January 2012 and July 2013. That's the period of 1 year, 7 months. When you call $59.8 billion, just call it $50 billion. And it was surprising. And I don't think from the income, the oil incomes, I don't think when the IOCs, the operators remove their own and so on, what the government and cannot be up to that within that space of time. It's a lot of money. Later on, when there was so much talks about it, it changed it to 12 billion. Later, it changed it to 20 billion. So, even the figures, though everybody talks about for the 49.8, but the 12 billion later mentioned and 20 billion later mentioned. The Senate has to investigate and using consultants. One of the senators is here, Senator Negi, and they did not see the money. Government has to use PWD, PricewaterhouseCoopers, to audit. And PricewaterhouseCoopers said that NNPC cannot properly give proper account to about $1.48 billion. They queried that they did not say it was stolen, but in terms of documentation and so on, they couldn't give proper account. But the story is that under Jonathan, the country lost $50 billion. I remember that year when we have a conference between Africa and Europe, EU. So when we went to Brussels, of course, Angela Merkel, then the Chancellor of Germany, asked me for a bilateral. So she invited me. So I have to go there with some of my ministers. Immediately we got in. She did not even allow me to sit down. So President Jonathan, that Nigeria lost $49.8 billion. I just looked at her and said, well, Your Excellency, you know, Germany, the economy is quite strong. So 49.8, just call 50 billion. So your economy is strong. So if you lose $50 billion, you will not notice it. But in Nigeria, if we lose $50 billion, the federal government, the state governments will not be able to pay salaries. Yes. So she just turn and look at me and say, well, even in Germany, $50 billion is a lot of money. And ended there. So people will just hear some of these figures. But when you go into it, it is not quite correct. So yes, there is corruption in Africa, there is corruption in Nigeria, no doubt about that.
Yes.
But some of the stories are not absolutely correct.
Yeah. So that said, we're talking in this governance meeting about trust, right? And what is it that makes building trust possible? What is it that allows a social contract between the state and society to happen? even in the midst of all the stories. But I think the biggest story for people is their daily experience. It's what they experience, not necessarily what they read. You know, you come from an oil-producing part of Nigeria, and I happen to have gone to school in that region. And I remember, and this is college, times when we would see the gas flaring in the region. This was at Abraka. And yet we didn't have power to study. This is what I would walk away with. You know, it's like there is extraction happening right here in front of me, but the dividends are not impacting my life. This is the story that people have that create this sense of mistrust. Whatever the facts are on the stories, the fact is people are not experiencing the benefits of the resources that they see daily being extracted, even sometimes from their communities. And this is Africa over, whether you're talking about DRC, or you're talking about South Sudan, or you're talking about Nigeria. And today, when the world has gone transactional, we're now talking about, will African leaders, in negotiating, say, critical minerals, which is in high demand by many parts of the world, vote for their people? Will they negotiate on the basis of the interest of their people, or will there be once again a selling out of the resources of the people? So these are questions that obviously relate to governance, but I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you maybe a final question, and then I will open up to some Q&A. We know that you have established the Goodluck Jonathan Foundation, and you are also part of this mediation force under the elders. Could you share maybe some behind-the-scenes story where your identity as a former president made a difference in a tense mediation situation, and what qualities do African leaders need most to be effective peace builders today? We're looking for jobs for former presidents so that they can actually leave. So if you can sort of give us some insights on life after the presidency, and what you would advise those who are in power and contemplating maybe also conceding, what qualities they would need, or what opportunities are there for them to continue to make their legacy.
Thank you. You raised a number of things. I hope I'll be able to cover all of them. Anyone that I don't know, somebody person can ask. But the key thing is the word trust. Even relating to the activities of a former president, relating to leaders and the citizens of their country. Trust is not something that you can impose or even use the holy books to deceive people. People look at you and look at your family, and you cannot, maybe you have children that are just in their 20s and they are driving the best cars, they've been hitting people, killing people, spraying money in pub clubs and so on, living a very kind of lavish life. And you were a government functionary, be it a president, be it a governor, be it a minister, or thereabouts. And you expect people to trust you. Nobody will trust you. So your lifestyle would attract that trust. If people don't believe in you, they will not trust you. And it affects the relationship between leaders. And you could talk from morning till night. For example, probably when you are in office, all the pebbles, you take it to the right. You have left office as a president, you've gone to another president and said, please, these pebbles, don't take everything to the right, spread it. The man will look at you and look at this hypocrite. He said I should give you some life examples. I think Moyo is here. When we had some issues in Guinea, when Alpha Conde wanted to amend the constitution after finishing his first 10 years, I wanted to amend the constitution for another 12 years, and there was so much tension in the country. He, through the NDI, came to Soglo for us to go. They mobilized us for us to go and have conversation with President Alpha Conde. I remember we had a lot of interaction. At a point, Alpha Conde was very angry. And you know what he said? He said, for Jonathan, yes, I can understand. But you Soglo, you can't talk to me. That when you're in office, you did this, you did this, you did this. So he remembered certain things that Soglo did. Soglo is much older than us. But he said, you cannot tell me this because you did things worse than this. So, in fact, because of the way a leader lives his life and the circumstances around you, can make it easier for you to solve problems. Look at this in the last election in the Gambia here. We came under the platform of the West African Elders Forum. When the results were announced, the country was tense. That night, it was about 11, between 11 and 12 or so. We get the signals that the youths from the opposition have gathered in the house of the opposition leader, and they want to mobilize that night to create havoc in the city of Banjul. So what do we do? And the security were everywhere. So if these youths move out in that night, they will clash with the security with weapons. Definitely there will be few deaths. We have to move to the person's house. And when we got there, we saw the sea of young, angry people outside the house. But immediately we were walking in that night, and they were talking to themselves, who is that? So President Jonathan. The hearing that was President Jonathan alone calmed the atmosphere, about 50%. That at least we've gone to listen to them, and this is a man that would surely say the truth to government or whatever. Because we passed through, we had a conversation with the leader until we were able to convince them to dispatch the youth. So sometimes the personal reaction, when we went to the Botswana election, Botswana, the ruling party that just lost the election, was there for 58 years. From independence, only one party that was able to rule. And before the election, the president has left. I said, Jonathan, well, you were the president of Nigeria and you left. So if I lost the election, I will leave. So that's what he said. That means that he remembered what I did in Nigeria. So in one way or the other, sometimes people don't say it out. But sometimes just seeing you and remembering what you stand for brings some kind of calmness in them. So definitely, the issue of trust is critical for leaders and even for the interaction with people generally. I don't know what other things you raised. The gas flaring and things like that in Nigeria?
No, that was just like a side comment
to
buttress the fact that people want to see the impact of good leadership on their lives, on their daily lives, and that's what builds trust. If they see change happening because of leadership, but if they don't, if it doesn't affect their daily lives, it's, no amount of data you give them or conviction will change their minds. I just want to, as we start to conclude this hour, to give, if you allow me, Mr. President, to give the chance to the audience, given what you've heard, any reactions. And I will give a chance to 2 or 3 comebacks here. Do we have a roving mic? Can you please give a mic to the gentleman in front and then over there, and then maybe I'll take one lady over here, yes.
Excellencies, thank you very much, Mr. President. My name is Senator Abdul Ningi, and I'm a senator in the Nigerian Parliament. Mr. President, let me most profoundly say I'm so proud of you. Your opening speech has actually made our days here. Mr. President, recalled when you were in power, I was in the Senate, and of course, the Deputy Senate Leader. We had majority both in the House of Reps and in the Senate and in the subnationals. That means we had more governors, almost 22 to 21 governors, and almost 473 local governments out of 77 from Nigeria. My question has to do with this scenario of most leaders, particularly in Nigeria, having what you call in the Nigerian parlance cabal. These cabal are defined as the inner caucus of most head of states or president in Nigeria. And there was this rumor that if the cabal had known you are going to concede to the president, we had this rumor that you would have been drugged so that you will be sleeping for 24 hours, and therefore there is no way you concede. Secondly, we heard that there was this rumor that they make it almost impossible for you to come out and address the Nigerian nation while conceding. Mr. President, my question is, did you foresee at that material time that there are some interest groups within the presidency and outside the presidency that had that ambition, and therefore you did a fast one on them and quickly concede even before the formal announcement of the official result? That is one angle. The next question has to do with the aftermath. I'm concluding. Mr. President, is there anything that still agitates your mind that you would have actually accomplished as a president, that day in, day out, will keep thinking about it? What specific things will you not share with the audience that you wish to accomplish but did not? Thank you very much.
Thank you, distinguished Senator Nengi. Luckily, we are in government at the same time. You are still there, but I've left. In terms of my concession, there are so many stories about it that were not quite right. In terms of the issue of cabal, I don't know, Nigeria, that word cabal has now come to stay in our political vocabulary. But there is nobody who will hold a very high office, even in the private sector, that don't have some key people around him. No matter how knowledgeable you are, you need people to sometimes give you certain suggestions, sometimes look at something differently. So there's absolutely nothing wrong in a president having some key leaders that he can, but not everybody will easily have access to the president. In one way or the other, he may have some friends, some old colleagues, and so on. The problem we have is that, and that's why we use this name cabal and we put some kind of negative connotation to it, because the advice and their suggestions is to their own benefit. If they are advising a president or a prime minister on general things that will bring benefit to the public, nobody will frown about it. Why should the president have a cabinet of ministers? They are all cabal, because they meet in the executive council to conspire about how they will run the country. But it's just a larger cabal. So, yeah, so presidents have that. I don't really have a cabal by definition. But yes, some elders, some people senior to me who have been in government before me, who have seen it all, from time to time see me to make suggestions. And that is normal for everybody. I remember there was a time I was talking with the first military governor of the old River State, King Yeta Spiv, who was the governor at the age of 24, as a military officer. I said that sometimes when he called some of his commissioners and direct them to do certain things, they will turn at him and say, my son will not do it this way. Yes. So you have those kind of who are senior to you that sometimes can help. So there's nothing wrong. And there's no cabal that confused me. That day, I remember vividly that I called General Buhari. Results were coming in. Then I witnessed the incident that happened at the National Election Center when Elder Rubebe, who was representing me, challenged Jiga, the chairman of the National Independent Electoral Commission. And it was very bad that people say the country would go into crisis. We witnessed all that. So yes, some of my aides, some ministers were there with me, some of my aides were there. And people were talking random. I couldn't even talk. I was just listening to people. Everybody is making one suggestion or the other, and so on. I remember Ngozi too was there, the finance minister there. Attorney General, I think, was also there. Dudafa was there. This theater minister then, Shidoka. Shidoka was also there. So I listened to everybody who was talking. So at a point, I left them and entered to my study down. And I called the control to link me up with President Buhari then. I didn't even tell them. So they linked me up, then I congratulated Buhari. So after that, I came back to join them, and they were still talking. And I said, well, gentlemen, no need to talk again. I've congratulated Buhari, he's over. Then Chidoka, I said, President, have you done that? I said, yes. They said, can I tweet it? I said, go on and tweet it. So it was Chidoka that tweeted, and they went viral. So the stories of Kabak pushing left and right, I don't think it was quite correct. There was nothing like that. Then you ask whether there are certain things I would have loved to do, but I couldn't do. Yes, I was there for 5 years. So definitely you cannot exhaust what you would love to do for your country, but I don't need to lament over those issues. The people who have taken over will continue to run the country the way they see Nigeria. Will continue to look at them and make their own suggestions. I don't want to begin to lament over what I would have done differently or whatever. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Thank you so much, Mr. President, former President of Nigeria. And I've actually been personally looking for this opportunity to exchange with you on some of the experiences. Okay. I know that the focus of this conference is about governance, and limiting that to elections would be quite simplistic, which I wouldn't want to do. But just to emphasize the point that when you were in the government, I'm sure as a leader, you immediately concern yourself with policy making, but the implementation lies within the purview of the civil service. And I think when we talk about governance, we need to basically look at how civil service is quite sufficient and efficient enough to undertake certain policies that you've been able to implement. How do you deal with some of the challenges within the civil service to ensure that they're able to take up certain policy initiatives that you initiated during your tenure for implementation?
Thank you. I think yesterday we had the permanent secretary from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here. He's not here today. Well, sometimes, yes, the civil service, people claim, could affect the performance of government. And why in Nigeria we call it the civil service? The private sector don't have civil service. The civil service is to make sure that political leaders, be a governor, be a president, don't make mistakes. And that is why you have the bureaucracy in the civil service. In the days the civil service was the civil service. If, for example, a country or a state want to handle a big project, it could be an engineering project, build house or bridges or road, first they will pass all those things through the people engineers, level 9, level 10. Then escalate to the principal of engineers, level 12, chief engineers, 13, 14, 15. Then before you go to the management, assistant directors, before you finally go to permanent secretary and go to the commissioner, before it will go to the governor at the state level, to make sure that whatever the governor signs, there's no error. But you see, these days, we the political class sometimes even take over the responsibility of the civil service because we don't want checks. If a vendor brings a proposal of, say, 500 million, it's just begin and end on the president's table or begin and end on the governor's table. And if it goes to the civil service, of course, they will say no, they have to go through. They have to look at the costing. Yes, we have procurement processes and so on and so forth. But sometimes we, the politicians, want to run excessively fast for one reason. As a politician, if they elect you as a governor or a president in Nigeria, just have 4 years. So if you have money, you want to quickly do things. And if somebody is delaying, you get angry. But to me, from my experience, I don't think the civil service was much of a problem in terms of executing our project. My governor there was a minister of FCT. Federal Capital Authority is one of the big ministries because of the volume of work they do. Because the permanent secretary works with a minister or a commissioner, who is the political head of that department of government, that ministry. The permanent secretary heads the civil service. And of course, as the president, if the permanent secretary is not doing too well in a particular department, you can always ask the head of service to move the permanent secretary out to another place. Some of the directors are professionals. They can be moved from one ministry to the other. Very few directors that stay in just one ministry till they retire. So if the president or the governor is focused through his ministers and his commissioners, civil servants will not frustrate. The fear and the common statements in Nigeria is that, civil servants even add monies to projects, which your procurement department is supposed to check that. And you can. When I was there, I brought people from the World Bank that were working with my economic advisor, 2 officers from the World Bank. The World Bank was paying them. So for any major procurement, they will also look through whether it is in line, in line with international best in terms of valuation. So a president, especially, you have the opportunity to get assistance from international organizations to give you some technical people to support you. So I don't believe that the civil service is frustrating government that much. Yes, there may be issues. But sometimes if you dig deep into the issues, the civil servant may be correct.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to take just one last. Allez-y, madame, en français ou en anglais? En français. En français.
You will interpret it for me.
Merci beaucoup. Merci Excellence pour ces interventions très pertinentes. C'est un plaisir de vous voir aujourd'hui dans cette salle et désolé de parler en français. Je vais aller droit au but, c'est une question. Aujourd'hui, nous avons une jeunesse africaine très engagée, très ambitieuse, mais qui se cherche, qui cherche la voie. vous, en tant que président, avec ce parcours aussi inspirant, qu'est-ce que vous nous conseillez? Quelle est la voie à emprunter pour avoir un parcours aussi inspirant que le vôtre? Pas seulement en devenant président, parce qu'il faut se le dire, on ne peut pas tous devenir président, mais vous avez impacté avant votre présidence, pendant votre présidence, et aujourd'hui vous continuez d'impacter à travers votre fondation. Qu'est-ce que nous devrons faire en tant que jeunes pour avoir ce parcours comme vous l'avez eu? Merci.
Thank you. I think the key thing is about the youth. Yes. In Africa, we know, in fact, that's why everybody says Africa is a young continent, because the population of young people is quite high. And sometimes as a leader, the first problem is that how do you manage the young people? And the young people of the present generation, different from when we were young, because of technology. When we were, we're talking about, the world is a global village. With technology now, the world is a global conference center, just a conference room. Because as you are here, you can reach anywhere. And because of that level of information available to the young people, and of course they are the people who are very technology savvy, they want to run fast. I remember when I finished my first degree, I was not thinking about riding a car immediately. But these days, youths, when they are still undergraduate, they want to ride the best cars. So sometimes they tend to rush excessively, and that pushes them into some behavior that are not acceptable by society. If you look at those who traffic drugs, and maybe in Nigeria, this issue of kidnapping and other vices are mainly done by young people because of the desire to get money fast and live like your colleague who is so young, 20-something years, driving a very big car. So the youth also should know that society is not built in a day, and even yourself, you cannot build yourself in a day. That take time to develop yourself. Have a clear focus of what you want in society. That is first and foremost for a young person. Otherwise, you will be drifting and floating like water lettuce in the river. Just have a clear focus of this is where this is where I'm going as a person, and work towards achieving that. Along the line, you may have some obstacles, you may have some challenges, but you will be able to get to the target. Don't allow yourself to be pushed up and down because of the influence of your peer, especially those who are into all kinds of businesses, using the internet fraud and all those things. So the youth, that they are people who own us. And if Africa must get out of the woods, it's still the young people. Remember the classical British economist that wrote this essay in 1930, planning for the grandchildren of the Britain. And it became a dominant economic essay that government patterned a lot of planning after that. So when we don't plan for our children, then we are planning to fail. People like us, we are almost gone. So if you plan for me, you're wasting time. We have to plan for our grandchildren as a continent. So the youth are very, very relevant, but they must be in position to be trusted and also to hold high offices. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. When we don't plan for our children, we are planning to fail. What an amazing statement a note to end on. And as we exit this moment with former President Goodluck Jonathan, I just want you to have a final message for your peers, for sitting leaders in Africa, for leaders in the global governance, because we're talking about governance in the Sahel, but it's intricately linked to global governance, the way our world is being governed today. And of course, governance from an Africa, from a regional perspective. If you had a last word for how you think leaders, whether at the continental, national, or global level, should behave, one word for each of those layers, for us to succeed as a people and as a world, what would those final words be?
Thank you. It's just one word for all the layers, actually. But leadership is leadership. There's so much literature on leadership. I sometimes don't even read, because sometimes what is written practically doesn't go that way. And because I used to tell people that I remember, was it in the 80s? Yes, I had a friend. That was the beginning of use of computer for word processing. Just came into Nigeria. Then we were using electric typewriters after the manual typewriters. And one of my friends, happened to be from my community, established a word processing office in Port Harcourt, and so many people were going there to do word processing. So a small business was booming. Then he wrote a book on management of small businesses and launched the book. Then, because he had his computer, so he also developed a magazine on marriage counseling, how to counsel husband and wife. Do you know that year, his business collapsed. His wife divorced him. So sometimes I try to separate the theoretical things we read from books from practical realities. So, but basically, for us in Africa, who are privileged to be leaders, especially at the national level, first and foremost, you must take your citizens as the most precious commodities that you have. And you must take the whole of your country as your garden. And if you take, just like if you have a garden, you wouldn't want to see any rubbish anywhere in the garden. You would want to remove it. So if you take your country as your garden, then you want to do the best. And probably that is the difference between the countries that are ruled by kings and emirs, compared to the countries that are governed by so-called elected political leaders. Those kings and emirs see the whole country as their own asset, and they do the best. So if you go, so you will say, yes, it's not the top level of practice of governance that you want to see, because we are made to understand that democracy is the best. It may not be democratic. Probably you may never be minister of finance or whatever, except you're from the ruling house. But then, in terms of taking care of the people generally, they say they do better, because they see every part of the country as their own. The problem we have in Africa is that political leaders tend to see only a section of the country and some of the citizens as their own. The rest they have to get, you don't bother. Just like this lady's book that I made reference to, the white South African journalist, Our Turn to Eat. So that is the fundamental problem. So after that is trust. We must live our lives in a way that our citizens will trust us. If, as a president, your lifestyle and the lifestyle of your family members is so glamorous, how would you tell the ordinary person to go and tighten his belt? Then you're an hypocrite. So what we do must communicate to the people better than what we say. I remember when we were trying to, like I was telling you about agriculture. Nigeria, we spent a lot of money importing wheat because our population is big. And you know, in those days, even the change of the cost of bread alone has collapsed empires in those days. And to make sure that the cost of bread comes down and we spend less money in importing wheat, we try to do substitution, add some cassava flour into the wheat to produce our bread. And when we started it and so on, we see that the quality of the bread is quite high. But when you just say, this is cassava bread, people find it difficult to sell it. And I said, in the State House, it is only that bread that will be served. So if you know your president eats that bread, you will be encouraged to eat it too. And we started growing rice. But imported rice into the country, more expensive. And imported rice, frankly speaking, some of them have stayed in those countries for upward of 5 years, 10 years. They are silos. So no nutrients again. The locally grown one, even richer in terms of food value. But people, because of the other one is poorly, so why this? So I said, look, in the State House, you will not cook anything other than rice grown in Nigeria. You must use yourself, the way you do things, to communicate to the people. And you convince people faster than speaking to them from morning to night as if you're a preacher. You don't need to sermonize. You have to demonstrate. So, for leaders at all levels, our lifestyle is critical. And people must not take monies they can't spend. That is greed. It's worse than corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think you would agree with me that it's been really a lot of food for thought. Take away courage, credibility, compassion, if we're going to lead responsibly. I want you to join me in really showing appreciation to